that, I'll go ahead and introduce us to the Audit Committee meeting for Friday, September 24th, 2021 at 12:30 p.m. Before we get started, I'd like to ask our interpreter, Carlos Diaz, to introduce himself and walk through how to access our interpretation services for today's meeting.
Thank you so much. As was just indicated, we do have interpretation available. I will begin with the instructions in Spanish, and I'll be back with the instructions in English in just one moment. Muy buenas tardes. Se está ofreciendo servicio de interpretación simultánea para esta sesión. Para hacer uso del mismo, por favor, desplácese a la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en tableta, celular, etc., presione primero los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Once again, we do have interpretation available. To use the feature, please scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a little world, and then select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile device, first press the ellipsis, the three dots, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on Mute Original Audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Thank you and gracias.
Perfect. Thank you, Carlos. Let's now move on to the pledge. If folks are ready, whoops. Thanks for putting on the flag. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and
justice for all.
Great. And then finally, Francesca, you've already confirmed a quorum. I'm assuming that's still the case.
Yes, sir.
Great. So with that, we move on to the approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes? I don't see any hands. I don't see any members of the public with comments on the minutes either with hands up. Correct, Francesca?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
Musgrove will move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Francesca, can you call the vote?
Thank you very much. For Board Member Chair Zito.
Zito, yes.
Thank you very much. Board Chair Vasquez is not with us today. She is absent. So Board Member.
I'm here. This is Raquel Vasquez, Mayor for the City of Lemongrass.
Oh, I'm sorry, Raquel. I thought you weren't going to be with us today.
Yes, my intention was to try and make it, and surprisingly, I am here.
Awesome.
Well, we're glad to have you. I'm sorry, I did not intentionally skip you there. Board Member Vasquez, can I have your vote, please?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Public Member Agnes Wong Nickerson.
Wong Nickerson, yes.
Thank you. Public Member Stuart Halpern.
Halpern, yes.
Thank you. And Public Member Bob Monson.
Monson, yes.
Thank you very much. And that item does pass unanimously.
Thank you. We now move on to public comments for non-agenda items. Are there any members, non-board members wishing to make a comment? Seeing none. Any board members wishing to make comments? Seeing none. So we'll go on to the executive director's report. And I think I saw Hassan here earlier.
Thank you, Chair, committee members. Mary, good afternoon. It's good to see you back. We were dark in August. I don't know whether I should say I missed you, but we did miss you. I mean, we got used to seeing you so often, and all of a sudden we don't see you for a month and a half. So it's good to be with you. My report might be a bit longer than usual. I apologize for that, but I do want to make sure you are informed. First, as you know, we were supposed to come back, board members on policy in September, and giving the rise in in the Delta variant, and given the fact that we wanted to improve the boardroom, we delayed that until to see what things are. So the numbers are looking promising. We don't know what the numbers are, but we're now hoping for the coming back November 19th, which is the only meeting in November. For sure, we're going to be here back for the adoption of the 5 big moves, the regional transportation plan, on December 10th. But we'll be informing you. I'm happy to report to you that our staff, all 400, some of them were back September 7th. Like Melissa said in the beginning of the meeting, glad to have them back, glad to see. I'm not sure they're as glad to see me, but I am glad to see them. We're making sure everyone is staying healthy, and we're doing everything we can because that's paramount important. But we are all back, open for business and open to the public. And I appreciate my staff cooperation on this. Second, I want to inform you that we did pass a vaccination policy for staff. And we said 45 days after the FDA fully approved the vaccine, that's when the policy became effective. That date is October 8th. So by October 8th, all of our employees will either have to be vaccinated or have a medical or religious excuse not to be. Otherwise, they cannot work for Sandag. The good news is most of our employees, over 95% of our employees, are now have showed proof of either partial vaccination or full vaccination. But to protect that, the majority, the over 90%, we did this vaccination policy, and we're going to implement it starting in October 8th. Again, it's good to see everyone back. Let me move forward and want you to recognize Mexican National Day or Independence Day that happened on September 16th, or the Hispanic American Heritage Month, which we observe every year starting from September 15th through October 16th. It is important to acknowledge the significant contribution Latinx people have made to our culture, community, and economy of our amazing binational region. I am proud of Sandaggers and Sandag employees who celebrate our diversity by showing our commitment to advance equity and inclusion. Last week also marked the conclusion of Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur is the holiest day in the Hebrew year, known as the Day of Atonement. People of the Jewish faith and spend the day in prayer and asking for forgiveness. Let me move to the regional transportation plan and the 5 big moves. I'm really proud of the team here at Sandag, who truly reimagined the future transportation system, truly still working in the many hours of the day in the last final stage before the adoption of the plan on December 10th. We have released the EIR for public review until October 11th. I want to thank our environmental staff, especially Keith Greer, Kristen Yersall, and Samantha Folke for their excellent work. And I want you to know that regardless of how you feel about the plan or the 5 big moves, this is truly becoming the way to go for the state of California. These ideas of having strategies that uses data, anticipate technologies, and provide the flexibility and choices for San Diego is what's about. Fixed guideway systems are good, but they don't work everywhere, and especially in San Diego, in regions like San Diego. We have 2 fixed guideway rail systems, the purple line and the blue line, and I think they're right. But our most of our system relies on the flexible fleet, the 4th move, and the next operating system, the next move. For that reason, we are actually going to the market next month. We're going to release a request for information. for 10 to 15 miles of tunnels. And our performance objective is to have a driverless shared electric system. We visited Las Vegas to see the Elon Musk boring company system they built from the convention center to the strip. And it's actually working. And they're building 1.8 mile, 3 station, one of them underground at a cost of $52 million per the whole project. The cost of a subway in LA is costing $1 billion a mile. There's other companies that's now doing something in San Jose called the Glides that doing that. So we're gonna tell the market, listen, we're your partner. We don't want you just to put your money, but we're gonna put Sandag will be your partner. We will have a partnership in developing future technologies. Imagine getting in all the landmarks, SeaWorld, Balboa Park, Bitco Park, the airport, in a matter of minutes in a system that San Diego needs. Earlier today, the board discussed the bike program and the fact that we're accelerating funding and moving it. It was emotional to hear the sister of the gentleman who got killed. Literally, they were biking home from dinner. And she looked behind and she saw it. It was such an emotional thing. It was hard to sit through. That shouldn't happen in a great place like ours. That should never happen. The zero vision should be taken seriously. And those who deny the global warming and deny that we have, issues with the way we're moving forward should think again. We are taking this very seriously, the 5 big moves. So next month, we're gonna release this RFI and we're gonna put millions of dollars on the table to partner with the private sector to truly build the system of the future for San Diego, the clean system of the future, the driverless system of the future, the on-demand system of the future. In addition to that, I have directed my staff to start immediately looking at the tip, the $600 million tip that we adopted on September 2019. We believe that $600 million tip was a mishmash of things that don't make sense. We're gonna majorly amend it. Maybe we'll make a lot of money available to do the right thing, to move in the right direction. So this bike program will move in the right direction. In addition, in the next month or so, we are gonna start the process of amending the ordinance to move the bike program into major corridors, to change the 2% allocation to 4%. And we're gonna amend the tip. All of that is gonna lead to a January major amendment to the transit ordinance. It is time to practice what we preach. And I think adopting the plan in December, at least from a staff standpoint, obviously the board could act however they want to act. We are going to recommend what we think is right. Free politics, free of give me my part, free of peanut butter spread for everything we have. So that is on the 5 big moves. I hope you stay involved, and you should, if you're attending the final baseball game of the Padres this weekend, you're gonna see a video plays out that try to educate and outreach to San Diegans about their plan, about the 5 big moves. Watch that video and enjoy it. We'll play Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It's also gonna play in major conferences like Mobility 21. They're not gonna charge us at Mobility 21 with 1,000 attendance. Plays in basketball halls, plays in the community. We participated in a beach cleanup in North County. We're gonna do similar things in every sub-region. We're gonna participate in bike rides, Sandag staff. About 56 people participated in the cleanup with our chair Bixby. But many of them are our staff, and we encourage our staff to be part of the community. We're gonna have extensive public outreach beyond just the normal meetings that we have 20 or 30 people showed up to. because San Diegans deserve to know what we're planning for. So that's on the plan and on the bike program and on the RFI that I'm really looking forward to seeing out. On the other priorities of the agency, the Mid-Coast largest infrastructure project, the FTA's Gold Star is moving forward as planned, on time, on budget, to be turned over to our partner MTS in November 21st. We had a community celebration attended by 1,600 people. I hope some of you find time to attend. We're also offering rides, this magnificent project. Hope that you can participate. Otay Mesa 2 is moving forward. As a matter of fact, in 15 minutes, I'm going to be meeting here at the Vigil Lab with the governor-elect of Baja California, and looking forward to building the ties. So we move this project and open it as we scheduling it in September 2024. The Del Mar Bluff, as you know, we're starting Del Mar Bluff 5. We're continuing to look at the long-term solution. Many of you heard about the San Clemente issue, where now there is no train services for a while, and there is a bridge gap. Obviously, this, as we said before, this corridor needs to be dealt with. Chair, this concludes my report, and I'll be happy to answer any question. And I'm sorry it went a bit longer than normal.
Thank you, Hassan. Appreciate the detailed update. Do we have any comments from members of the public? Francesca, I don't see any.
I don't see any either, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Any board members care to make comments? I do not see anybody waving at me either. So Hassan, I'll just chime in and say I really appreciate the efforts and involvement around improving the bicycle infrastructure. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes back to us. I'll just make a comment that I also think that we need to internalize not just new infrastructure, but maintenance of existing infrastructure as well when we do that work. So hopefully that'll be part of it when we bring it back. Great, thanks.
Thank you.
With that, we'll move on to item 4, which is Mary's update. I think.
Afternoon. Thank you. I hope everybody's doing well. This will be a short update. I just wanted to give you an update on 2 audits we're working on that will be coming to you next month in October. One is being led by Lloyd Carter. He is doing the vendor review process and system control. And we are also working on the SR 125, wrapping that up, which Tawfiq is going to be bringing to you in October. So we're happy to see those 2 that will be completed and ready to go to you for review and then moved on to the board. And then we'll be starting the purchase card review, which was our next item, our audit on the audit plan. In addition to that, I've been working closely with staff, Sandag staff, and with Hassan on various other performance measures and goals, strategic goals and such that we have within our plan to work cooperatively and proactively with Sandag. And that is also happening. And I'm pleased to see that happening so well and going so smoothly and working so well. I also have Tawfiq that I'm going to introduce you to. He has joined us. We hired him in August. He's been here since about August 2nd and jumped right in. And he's a nice addition to our team. He works well already with us, has a similar mindset, which is always good, and has just jumped in and has been doing an awesome job in the short time he's been here. So I'm just gonna, that's the end of my update. So I'm gonna hand it over to Tawfiq and let him introduce himself and give us a little bit of background about him. Tawfiq?
Thank you, Mary. You know, I'm usually a shy individual. I don't like to be put on the spot like that, but here it goes. No, you know, I started here about 6 weeks ago and I'm really excited. My last job before coming here was at MTS, the transit agency. So I have some familiarity with transit issues in San Diego. Before that, I did work at the city of San Diego for a few years. I've been doing this government auditing work for about 17 years now. I started with the state auditor's office up in Sacramento. I enjoy the work. You know, I find that a lot of these audits, everyone is a different project. It's an opportunity to learn new things. And, it's a small office here at Sandag, but at MTS, it was all me alone. So I do enjoy the collegiality. And I have met a few of you. I think I met Mayor Vasquez briefly yesterday or a couple of days ago, and I met Hassan and John Kirk. I do know a couple of you, Councilmember Musgrove and Mr. Halpern. But yeah, I look forward to meeting you and having a long and productive career here at Sandag. Thank you.
It's great having you on board, Tawfiq.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Tawfiq. Welcome. I'm sure you'll be happy that you landed in such a great, productive and effective team. I find it difficult to believe that you feel yourself as shy, because it doesn't seem like a trait that I'm familiar with in an auditor, but looking forward to getting to know you, and I'm sure that won't be a challenge. And
Chair, I think Tawfiq knows that, I don't know whether we told him, but every new employee have to buy lunch for his bosses for the next month or so.
I see. Well, that's an interesting policy. I'll have to ask her if she's audited recently yet.
and if I could,
yes,
if I could make modification, also all of the members of the audit committee.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm all good. I'm adding that to the policy. No worries. Tawfiq, thank you very much.
Thank you. And Tawfiq, welcome. So very happy to meet you and looking forward to a long-lasting relationship of making sure that we minimize risk for Sandag and we allow Sandag to move forward with meaningful construction projects throughout San Diego County.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, then with that, we will see no other hands. We will move on to item number 5, discussion on procedures that the audit committee and Office of Independent Performance Auditor agreed upon. And Mary, I think you're taking this.
Thanks, Chair Zito, but we were going to jump to item 7 and then bounce back to 5 because these are our external auditors. They're on a timeline, and we agreed that we would let them quickly move forward with their item.
Okay, I think we can manage with that. So moving forward to item number 7, let me get down to there in my agenda. So are you going to kick it off, Mary, or do we hand it straight to Leanne and Catherine?
Nope, I'll hand it straight to Leanne.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
I don't know if Leanne is actually here today. So I'm happy to just go ahead and kick it off, Mary, if you'd like.
Sure. Sorry, Kathy. I understood Leanne was going to be joining. So Kathy, welcome, and it's all yours.
Thanks. And I guess I should say welcome to Tawfiq as well. I'm Kathy Lyon, I'm the audit partner with Crow, and we're the external auditors, of course, but work very closely with Mary and her team. And so I'm sure we'll get to work with each other as well. So by way of introduction, as I mentioned, Kathy Lyon, audit partner with Crow and the lead partner on this engagement. With me today, I've got 2 individuals on my leadership team. I've got Jennifer Richards. She's an audit partner serving over a portion of the deliverables. And then likewise, I've got Rachel Adova, senior manager, and she's the lead senior manager over the Sandag engagement. So I've got a brief agenda here for you today. If you could advance to the next slide. This is our planning communications as required under our auditing standards to meet with the audit committee. So I'm going to go over the engagement objectives, again, a reminder of the scope of the audit, as well as the deliverables that we intend to issue, and then also cover some other required communications under our professional standards. And certainly we have time at the end for questions or throughout the presentation. So if you advance to the next slide here, we've been engaged by Sandag to express an opinion on the financial statements of a variety of different entities, including Sandag as a whole. As an auditor, my job is to express that an opinion that those financial statements are fairly stated in accordance with what's called generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP. And then likewise, I also need to conduct my audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. And then also, because the government auditing standards apply, I likewise need to follow that as well. Management's job, of course, is to ensure that those financial statements are free of material misstatement and also in compliance with GAAP. They're solely responsible for the preparation related to those financial statements, as well as all of the related internal controls over the financial reporting. On the next slide here, we'll cover all the different required deliverables. There's quite a bit. The scope of work is very large, as you know from prior years. As I mentioned, we're going to do an audit of not only Sandag's annual comprehensive financial report and express an independent auditor's report, as well as a GAGAS opinion, which is a report on internal controls over financial reporting and on compliance. But there's also individual fund reports related to the San Diego County Regional Transportation Commission, and then a schedule of cash flows related to the commission. And then we also do separate fund audits for the South Bay Expressway, which is again another fund within Sandag's financial report, as well as component units for ARGIS, the Automated Regional Justice Information System, as well as SourcePoint. On the next slide here, again, additional scope of work related to compliance. We've also been engaged by Sandag to complete a single audit, which is an audit related to your federal grant expenditures. And so in conjunction with that audit, we will issue an independent auditor's report on compliance related to each major federal program, which is how we, Sandag receives a lot of different federal grants, but we go through a process under the standards to determine which of those programs that we will test in detail in accordance with uniform guidance. So we issue an independent auditor's report on that compliance, as well as the related report on internal controls over compliance. And then last but not least, we issue 2 agreed upon procedure reports. One is in relation to the National Transit Database, as well as the Coronado Bridge toll revenues. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer to cover another scope of work related to the TDA claimants. Jennifer?
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, and if we can just advance the slides to slide 6, so the slide right after this that Kathy just covered, great. So an additional scope here that we have is for the TDA claimants or Transportation Development Act. So just as a reminder, the TDA provides funding for the region's public transit operators and for non-motorized transportation projects. And the TDA comes from 0.25% of your sales tax assessed in the region, and it has specific audit requirements. So that's what we're looking at here. And Sandag administers the TDA program using formulas specified by the state. The County of San Diego has fiduciary responsibility of receiving TDA from the state and dispersing to these various claimants as per instructions that are received from Sandag. So as you see here, there is an audit of the county's local transportation fund, which is basically the bank for the TDA funds, in addition to the TDA recipients. So for the fiscal year 2021, there's TDA recipients or claimants that include the 12 cities listed here, the County of San Diego, and the 2 transit operators, Sandag and Full Access and Coordinated Transportation, or CTSA FACT. So that's basically the scope of the TDA audit, and a lot of different deliverables there, but just wanted to summarize what all that entails.
Thank you, Jennifer. So with that, I'll go ahead and move over to our plan scope and just our risk-based audit approach on the next slide. Our audit approach really includes 4 different phases. So from planning, we do interim procedures, year-end procedures, and then we wrap it up with reporting. So during each one of those phases, just very briefly on the planning side, really the primary objective here is to develop our audit strategy. This entails identifying key accounts and disclosures and related risks of material misstatement related to those key accounts, and to designing the respective audit procedures. And then as we move into the interim procedures, there's more of a focus with respect to the obtaining understanding of related internal controls, again, related to those key accounts. And so that really is analyzed from different perspectives, entity-wide level controls. We do consider IT, general and application controls, again, related to these key accounts, and then account level controls as well. And in selecting certain controls, we'll evaluate the design and in some instances test the operating effectiveness related to that as well. So moving to the third phase of our audit is where we focus on the year-end procedures, and that's what we're going to be doing here shortly at the end of October. That's where we substantively test certain account balances that are identified as key, look at the financial statements and review disclosures, et cetera. And then we wrap up with reporting with actually issuing our audit reports with our opinions related to the different entities. As I mentioned on the next slide here, during the planning phase and throughout the entire audit, we evaluate materiality. Our job is to determine whether or not those financial statements are materially correct in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And so we go through a process to evaluate materiality related to the different opinion units or certain funds within the financial statements of Sandiag. Certainly materiality has a quantitative factor as well as qualitative factors. And at the end of the audit, you should expect to hear from us, as required under our auditing standards, a listing of any corrected or uncorrected misstatements that are material that we need to bring to your attention. On the next slide here, as I mentioned during our planning phase, as we develop our audit strategy map, we also, in the identification of the key accounts, we also assess any types of significant risks. Under our auditing standards, there is a presumed risk of management override of internal controls. And so as we go into the audit with this presumption, we do certain procedures to ensure that management is certainly ensuring that they have appropriate internal controls such that there's no override, again, relative to our certain key accounts. Last but not least here on the plan timing, I just wanted to give you a timeline here of where we are in the overall engagement, as well as a roadmap from where we started. So we did our planning in May and June, and then likewise began our interim audit procedures. And then here we are kind of doing our planning to prep for our year-end audit procedures as well. We expect to issue the financial statements in December, and then to follow up in the January through February timeframe with the completion of the single audit or the audit related to the federal grants, as well as the agreed upon procedures such as the National Transit Database, as well as the Coronado Bridge AUP as well. And then, as Jennifer introduced, we do have those Transportation Development Act audits, those fiscal and compliance audits, and typically those are conducted from August and December, and then we will come back separately and present those as well. Now for some required communications, if you could advance to the next slide. It's very important to me as your auditor, external auditor, that you know that you've got an open line of communication with us, especially as we are conducting your financial statement audit. And of course, if there's anything that you identify, and I've listed these on the slide here, anything from weaknesses and internal controls that you have perhaps observed, anything related to fraud, inappropriate tone from known, alleged, or suspected fraud, or any tips or complaints or possible violations of law, really all matters warranting that, in your opinion, that warrant our attention as your external auditors. I just want you to know that you have an open line to us to communicate that to us so we can take that into consideration relative to the impact on the financial statements as well as our audit. So with that, wraps up my presentation. I'm happy to address any questions that you might have.
Thank you for that. With that, we will see if there are any public comments first, I think. Do we have any public comments, Francesca? I don't see anybody up. Board member comments or questions? People that would want to jump in? Raise your virtual hand if you have any. I don't see anything. I guess just from my perspective, Catherine and Jennifer, thanks for the presentation. Thanks for the engagement and the information. Appreciate it. Just a quick question. So on the efforts, is the team that is involved with the audit also participating in audits of other organizations this year, or is it fully committed to this particular audit?
Yeah, so our core team and from the seniors on down are solely dedicated to your respective audit during the fieldwork timeline that you noted. As partners and senior managers, we have other clients, but in one respect, it is very helpful to you because we have the different perspective of a lot of different transportation agencies that we work with across the state, as well as across the country, to be honest. So for example, I'm the lead partner with respect to Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is like your counterpart in the Northern California Bay Area. And then likewise on Orange County Transportation Authority and Rachel's got experience with LA Metro, and we've all worked with San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. And so they're all in the same vein with respect to what you do. And, truly, as we interviewed, for this opportunity, when we were first engaged several years ago, I really think it was our deep industry expertise that I think lended value with respect to our qualifications to conduct your audit. So hopefully we found that valuable, but your core team with respect to the senior in charges and below that will be assigned and solely working on your engagement during the time frame we noted.
No, that's great. And that's what I would expect. Appreciate the clarity and information. It kind of leads into the question that I had, which I am curious, when you're auditing agencies like ours, how often you're finding issues or statements that are not materially correct and things that need to be corrected, and wondering if you'll be able to provide context on how you feel Sandag does against other agencies as you go through the audit, or perhaps at your conclusion.
Yeah, I appreciate the desire to be compared and contrasted. It's
right.
Obviously that presents some questions with respect to client privacy, the same way in which we would respect your privacy. But I will say this, in working with your management for the past few years, as we have presented recommendations related to the implementation of new accounting standards, and even as case in point, our first year where we were engaged, where we had sat down with management and had gone through all the different financial reports that were issued before we had come on board, and provided some comments really in the same vein as what you were suggesting, not necessarily material misstatements, but I would just say adjustments, with respect to as a fresh perspective and understanding what generally accepted accounting principles requires, how they were meeting that measure. And management has been very amenable to working with us, and really I found that they have wanted to get to the right answer when it came to accurate financial reporting. And then likewise, as we've had recommendations, which we have on likewise the TDA audits, as well as on the financial statement audits in the past, recommendations for improvement. And so if that's just my perspective without really comparing to other agencies. I will say most of my agencies, we do make recommendations when we feel that there needs to be a recommendation to be made, whether it's a deficiency or significant deficiency or a material weakness. That's what we've been engaged to do. So we have no concerns with being able to do that.
Great. Yeah. And that sort of was the gist. I mean, in some of the boards that I sit on, I've seen, report year after year after year that there, nothing is found and there are no notable weaknesses. And so that leads to the question, which is why obviously we don't want to invade anybody's privacy. But if there are enough other clients, it would be possible to say, which is why I ask these questions on other boards as well. Do you ever find material weaknesses, and this ever coming up? Because it is one way to evaluate the depth and thoroughness of the audit that we get, is if a company is never finding weaknesses, then we have to wonder if the audit is doing well enough, or if we just have a perfect organization. And I'm not saying that's the case in Sandag, either one way or another, or even with your company, but it's just the basis of the question, as opposed to trying to pry into other people's business.
Sure. Yeah, understood. Yeah, and I guess conversely, I'll just offer this too, best practices, right? It's not that it's a compliance issue of one way or another, but we just have this unique vantage point of seeing kind of some best practices, and we're not afraid to share those as well.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
And I appreciate it, and thanks, and I hope you have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. So with that, I believe we can go back to item number 5 at this point. Mary?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 5, we are bringing this back. Early last year, with a couple of members that are no longer here, so we have some new members, we agreed upon an audit report distribution process. And that was a discussion. It's not a formal board policy. I don't even think last time we took a vote on it. It's just, this is what we agree, the reporting process. It's like we have a standard reporting process that we follow under GAGAS. This is more of an internal reporting process of how we're going to do things, how we're going to move the report through my office to the audit committee, and then to the board. And if there's any discrepancies or discussions, that sometimes those need to be heard, and how we're going to deal with those. So this is sort of taking that set of procedures, informing the new board members of those procedures, and then adding, based on discussion after the first audit was issued and some of the hiccups that came from that, really adding additional language that we kind of all agreed and talked about, and just putting it in writing and adding it to this audit report distribution process. So really it was because we have new members, we wanted to bring this back. The committee draft report review process really was not codified. So that's sort of putting this now in writing and getting that done. And a desire to be proactive to prevent past mishaps from occurring again. So that's really what the intent of this was. So previously, as I said, it was approved by the entire audit committee in July of 2020. And it was really just docketing the public posting titled, and we have that on our OPA website, which is called the Office of the Independent Performance Auditors Procedures for Communication and Website Posting. The steps regarding a review or briefing of the draft report to members in the committee just adds value. So we again just want to put that in writing. So what we did, the basic changes, I attached the whole procedure to the agenda, but just to break it out or highlight it, I highlighted it in the report as well. On page 3, we inserted 1.7, which is called member briefing of the draft report. And it's basically agreeing that at the time of the draft report is issued to Sandag's management, which would be Hassan and anyone who is involved in the audit that we were auditing, and the key personnel. I will brief them on an individual basis, and members of the, as well as members of the audit committee, for just general understanding. And I also talked and reached out to John about how that would look to make sure that we were not violating anything relating to the Brown Act. So again, in order to ensure that there are no Brown Act violations and that the auditor's independence is not impaired, at no point will there be a joint or a group discussion, nor will there be a draft report findings being removed for material changes as a result of those discussions. So we really will make sure that we are not violating the Brown Act. So that was an insert. So proposed audit committee members post presentation process looks like: 1, the AC will docket the public posting will be consistent with that approved by OPA's procedures for communication, which is this report, this process. OPA will present a summary of findings and recommendations based on that final audit report. Management has the opportunity to comment and provide that response. And this is a typical process that all auditors go with through the management. And then after the audit committee's questions and answers and discussion, the committee will then, of course, vote. And the vote will be either to accept the report, the finding, and the recommendations at the request that management prepare a corrective action plan, if applicable or necessary, or accept the report and findings, but with a request modification to or comment on specific recommendations and a request that management prepare corrective actions. So basically, it could be me coming and saying, here's my recommendations, and management might agree with them and we prepare a corrective action plan and we're all good to go. Or it could be that the audit committee accepts the report with some modifications or comments in addition or different than our recommendations, and then management, according to their feelings of how it works better, maybe not exactly my recommendations, corrective action plan is prepared, and then the audit committee accepts that. So the outcome of the vote and the comments, if any, will be presented to then after, which is typical, the Sandag Board of Directors at the next meeting that we can set up to have that. There's a gap there. It just is because of the way we do agendas here. There typically is a month gap. That report will then move forward to the board along with the corrective action plan, and usually management presents and I present as well. And so the outcome of the vote and comments, if any, will be presented to the Sandag Board of Directors at that next meeting. So in the case, this is what we added, in the case the vote is not unanimous, like everyone doesn't agree, and that happened last time, if any, the minorities will be given the opportunity to have included in the report to the board brief an explanation as to why there was a disagreement. So the reason for this is the board's really going to be able to see not just what the majority agreed upon and voted and how they voted, but also understand the perspective of the minorities and why they disagreed with the majority. And so just having that additional information available to board members really provides the board members with a full, transparent perspective as a whole. And then they can say, okay, you know, I agree with that majority vote, and I can see points or aspects of the minority, and then they can also consider that. So that's the reasoning behind that added. So with that, that's really the only changes to this agreement. Again, this is posted on OPA's website, on the public website for review. So it's again also very transparent. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. We can have further discussion, but really this again, we didn't do a formal vote on this, I believe, last time, and it is not a formal board policy. It's just sort of an internal policy and procedure between OPA and the audit committee. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Do we have any questions from members of the public?
I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
Neither do I. I do see, I think, Bob, did your hand go up first?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
No,
I'll
I
call
put it up. Mary, thank you for putting this together. I think it's always good, even if it's an internal policy, to have something in place that gives us all a guideline on how a process works. I'm in agreement with the changes, but I do have a question, and you can clarify it, or we can have further discussion. And it kind of relates back to the timing of posting the final report to your external website. And let me kind of tell you what my thinking is. Okay, you've got your draft report. I like that. Members can be briefed if they want to be. And then the report becomes final, meaning that you've got your findings, you've got your conclusions, you got management's responses. Then it comes to the audit committee, and the audit committee will go through the process. They vote, and they could turn around, as you said, they could accept the full report, the recommendations, and said, hey, go do your plan. Or they could come back and say, the report and findings we accept, but we have some modifications to make to your recommendation. So I guess my question was, like, we're going through this, was thinking from an efficiency standpoint, would it be better to wait on putting it on your public website until at least the audit committee has seen it? And if there are any modifications, then that report can be put on your website. Because I would assume, again, that if we're doing all our jobs right, by the time it goes to the board with all their information, there really shouldn't be a whole lot of changes. There may be, but again, you only have to make it one time. And I guess that's kind of what I wanted to bounce at and throw out.
That's exactly, I mean, I believe that's the process we have, is once it becomes agendized and the board and the audit committee, because then it's public anyways. The audit committee, usually when we bring the report, we're going to bring the report, management's going to be part of that discussion. They're most likely going to already have their corrective action plan prepared. And, from that point, if, for example, there was, based on the discussion with the audit committee, the audit committee says, well, can we, change this or modify this? And everyone's in agreement, then I would probably hold off on posting that because it's not really then finalized, right? Because we still have that little nit. So I would probably hold off on posting it, even though, again, it's public by then, it's agendized, but I probably wouldn't put it on my website until it's final. Like, we've all agreed, the corrective action plan has been changed in accordance with all of our agreements. And then it's ready to go to the board at that point. And that's probably when I would make sure then it's pretty clean at that point, and I would put it on the website.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that. One last thing, and it's just, I'm not sure, I want to make sure I'm understanding. When we talk about modifications, here. As an audit committee member, we're talking about modifications to your recommendations. As a prior auditor, the finding and conclusions that were made, those are the auditors.
Yep.
And shouldn't be made. So is that kind of what you're talking about?
Absolutely. So when I mean modification, it could be a modification that's agreed upon by the auditors and management and the audit committee, but it doesn't change my report. It doesn't change what is already written in the report. I don't modify that. It's just that, you know, as you know, Bob, as a previous auditor, we can make recommendations and findings, and nobody has to agree with them, right? So really at this point, that's still what it's going to remain is it's audit reports completed and finalized. That's what it is. And so really the modifications I'm talking about would be all of us having a discussion, and based on the input from the audit committee, the management and myself may say, you know, this is reasonable. We should add this or change this or modify this in the corrective action plan. And you know, that discussion can occur because really at that point, it's not in my control from an audit perspective. It's really what we all agree on is the best for the organization. But that does not change what I found, what I concluded, and all of that. That's pretty firm.
Okay. All right. Very good. I also want to welcome to Fick. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. Welcome. And hopefully we'll get a chance to meet face to face one of these times.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Stuart.
Great. Thank you. I have two things. First, just picking up where Bob was with regard to the modifications. Mary, I just want to also clarify under that sort of second scenario you described with regard to modifications. My experience is that the real rub on this, as you guys talked about, is your findings. Those things don't change. But that there can be some differing points of view sometimes between what you're recommending and what management feels is either appropriate, doable, agreeable, et cetera. And so I'm wondering if your sort of second alternative takes into account the prospect that the committee might say, you know, there's some disagreements between you two, let's put it that way, between the auditor and management. And they're such that we're probably not going to resolve those at this meeting, but that we as a committee request that you both parties take this back and spend some more time trying to form a bridge between, you know, the positions at the moment. Is that something that your sort of second alternative would contemplate as well?
Well, of course. So going back before it even comes in front of you, the audit committee, even before it gets finalized, hopefully, and this happens often, we have a discussion, we have a draft, we have a discussion with management at an exit conference, we give them time to review. They may come back to us and say, well, we have additional evidence we want to provide you, or we don't see this. So there's a lot of back and forth discussion that's going to happen between myself and management before we even finalize the report and the corrective action plan and it moves forward. So hopefully that discussion is going to capture any potential from that occurring. And that's typical. I mean, that's typically the nature and what occurs and how it happens. So really, we shouldn't have that, that coming. But if we did, Stuart, just because of the, you know, we're both going, no, I don't see it this way. Again, my bottom line is an auditor has recommendations and findings, and management may totally disagree with them. And so might the audit committee and the board, and say, we're just not going to act on any of this. We'll do this, but we won't do this. We don't believe it's a problem. And that's okay. But if, for example, we come to the audit committee and there's something that myself or management hasn't considered that the audit committee brings up or brings to the table and says, can you guys go back and work on this and then come back? Well, that's an option that we all have to do, right? We can make that happen as well. And of course, at that point, if it's still up in the air, I go back to what I said to Bob, I'm not going to post it on the website because it's still kind of up in the air. It's not really final, even though my report is final. That piece of how we're going to handle it after the fact isn't final.
Okay, yeah, I just think that's an important clarification, that it's not only that discussion in the meeting, but that there can be, and in some cases it's because you just run out of time, right? Because meetings are set way ahead of time, et cetera. That at least there'll be acknowledgement that there may be instances when, you know, there's a difference of opinion between management and you and your office. You bring it to committee, and that the committee may feel strongly enough to say, look, you know, we're not quite ready to fully accept this yet. We want you guys to go back and work on this some more. I think that's an important distinction to make clear, whether in the words of the that you have, or at least in the understanding of the members of the committee, that that is, you know, a legitimate part of this process.
Absolutely. And I think, again, from an audit perspective, and, you know, we have other auditors on that can jump in if they want to kind of agree or disagree with my perspective. But from an audit perspective, you know, we make every attempt to work through those kinks before a report becomes finalized. But there are going to be times where there's just a disagreement of the findings and the recommendations. And the auditor, based on, unless there's additional evidence or some type of reason why we can legitimately say as an auditor, we agree then, and we're going to change our position, our recommendation or whatever, we can do that before a report gets finalized. But really, if what you explained, Stuart, were to happen, the report would not change once it becomes finalized, just the perspective, right? So we might totally be okay. And again, auditors are often okay with it. If management says, and the audit committee says, I don't see it this way, we're going to go ahead and direct or suggest that management handle it this way, and we're comfortable with that. And it might be completely different than what I've recommended, or it might be completely ignore the finding, or it might be, I think this finding requires more attention than what the auditor is saying it requires, and I want to see that happen as well. And that's really why we bring the audit committee to weigh in and be able to be that balanced group of people that can look through their own lens and their own perspective and see something that maybe from me as an auditor that doesn't see, and from management they're not seeing. So you kind of are that middle ground where we can get a different perspective and then go back to the drawing table and say, okay, you know, we're going to make it a corrective action plan that fits those additional perspectives.
Great, yeah, because I think it is important to, again, acknowledge that sometimes the public discussion and the public light itself can help management see that they need to perhaps reach a little bit further in coming to agree with where your recommendations are. So thank you for that. And secondly, and somewhat related, I would like to propose that we in fact formally do vote on adopting this as a practice for our committee, if practice is the right word. And I don't know if John Kirk or somebody else.
Yeah, I'll let John jump in on, can we vote for it to formalize it from an internal perspective versus a board perspective? Because
I think from a point of view of clarity and it's important that it be clear amongst all of us that we agree that this will be the process.
I'm just taking a look at your agenda here today on this item, on item 5. Item 5 is discussion. I would say as it's described, it does sound like an administrative process. Administrative processes generally do not rise to the level of formally adopted policies. I would say not a board policy because it's not dictating the practices of the board. If you want to give direction to vote on this, my caution would be, if it's formally adopted by you as a practice, to make sure that the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor monitors it and makes appropriate updates to it, so that at any time it resides somewhere effectively and it's not left on a shelf.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, John. I have it in my audit plan and I do it on a quarterly basis. That's why I actually put it on the website. It is any reports, procedures, policies, and engagement manual, which I just got through updating, is updated, if not quarterly, annually. So that
Along
will
those
happen.
lines, Mary, can we just incorporate this as part of the audit plan and then it by definition gets voted on?
Well, it is part of the audit plan in that
Right.
my audit plan states that I will update all of my policies and procedures from
Okay.
administratively, that it's updated annually. So yeah, that would be included in that.
Okay, so it'd be fair to say that when we approve the audit plan, we should probably just be noting that we could be indirectly approving this procedure as well then. Or directly, and maybe that's a cleaner way to handle it.
Yeah, I'll
I
let
would say
John
that sounds
answer.
appropriate.
Okay, thanks. So,
Okay.
thanks for your comments, Stuart.
Yeah, as
I'm
long
sure
as
if
we
you
don't
wrap
have, as long as we don't have the situation where, you know, sometime down the road, somebody says, well, I never agreed to that, because I think Mary's put a lot of thought into this and we've had extensive discussions. Her changes make an awful lot of sense to me, and I would just like to make sure that
Along those lines, I did notice that unfortunately Agnes had to drop off in the chat box. So Mary, if you could loop back around with her and make sure that she's read it and feels like she's comfortable with the process, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, actually I did. I had a briefing with Agnes already and actually went through the whole document with her and also
Perfect.
the changes, and she was comfortable with it. Yeah.
Great.
Great, thank you.
Ahead of me, thank you, as usual. So with that, I don't see any other board member comments up, and appreciate the presentation again, Mary. We'll move on to item number 6. Before I kick it off, are we intending to handle 6, 6A, and 6B all individually, or Mary, do you want to just combine them all and take them all at the end?
So yeah, we can take all the comments at the end.
Okay.
Management will go by first as to what they did, and I'll follow through with my testing and the outcome of my testing.
Perfect, okay. And then we'll just wait for comments at the end.
Mhm.
Okay, who's first?
Chair Zito, it's Melissa, and I'm going to
Hi,
kick
Melissa.
things off
Thank
if
you.
you're ready.
Yep.
Great. So thank you for the opportunity to present this afternoon, and good afternoon to the committee members. Again, Melissa Caulfield, I'm the Director of Organization Effectiveness here at Sandag. And this afternoon, John Kirk, General Counsel, and I will spend the next few minutes describing and highlighting the work that management completed between April and June that fulfills commitments that were made as part of the compensation audit action plan. And as part of our remarks, we'll also note the work that is currently underway and due for completion by the end of the year. So just to quickly recap and provide some background, particularly for the benefit of our newer committee members, the Board of Directors approved the compensation audit action plan that management proposed last November. And this was in response to the various recommendations that Mary and her team had put forth as part of the salaries and compensation compliance audit. We often talk about the plan being comprehensive in nature. It directly addresses 27 of the recommendations that were identified as part of the audit. And as the plan was put together, the timeline for the various actions, those 27 actions, really took into consideration many of the established and recurring agency activities, so we could align the work to those activities. Examples were, knowing when the board typically considers and approves its bylaws and policies. Similarly, when the board typically approves the annual program budget and so forth. Of course, we're also mindful of the workload demands on the various teams who would be responsible for the action plan items. One of the other themes I think we often talk about with respect to the action plan is just how consistent the plan is with management's goal of achieving the highest levels of organization performance through continuous improvement. So we are definitely eager to put those recommendations in place. And throughout this process, particularly the period between April and June, which we're talking about today, Mary and her team have offered a lot of guidance to us in the work that we've done. So just want to publicly acknowledge and appreciate the support that we've had there. With regard to the status of the plan, which is the focus of today's presentation, we are proud to say that we got 11 items completed in that April to June timeline. The work that we completed falls into sort of three broad categories, if you will. First, there was several board policies and the SANDAG bylaws that were revised and updated, considered by the board. John's going to talk about those in just a few minutes. We also spent several of the activities were focused on how we increase the transparency and the robustness in our preparation, communication of salaries and benefits information that's provided to the board as part of our annual program budget. And then the third category is the market salary range study that staff completed earlier this year. Management provided Mary with a summary of information at the end of June, including evidence and samples of the completed actions. And as you know, Mary, as part 2 of this presentation this afternoon, will describe the work that she and her team have done to sort of test and verify the effectiveness of those actions. So I continue to talk about or reference the plan document, and just to make a note that that is included as attachment 1, which is, I believe, starts on page 20 of your online agenda package today. And it incorporates summary statements that we're providing to you today. At this point, I'd like to invite John Kirk, General Counsel, to share highlights of the work that he and his team completed with respect to bylaws and board policies. So John, handing it over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. 4 actions were taken and completed in response to recommendations that were made in the audit action plan. The revisions address the allocation of responsibilities, which is board policy number 1, and the delegation of authority policy, that's board policy 17, which focuses on that delegation specifically to the executive director, and similar direction in the SANDAG bylaws. The actions were approved by the SANDAG Board of Directors at their June 11, 2021 meeting, and that was after having been vetted up through the executive committee as well. These actions respond specifically to recommendations 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, and 3, 3. Looking at them individually here, revisions were made to the SANDAG bylaws, and those were made to Article 5 of the bylaws. Specifically, there was an amendment to Section 4D of that article, clarifying the executive director's responsibility for the employee handbook and the administrative policies that are used for the administration of SANDAG's personnel system. Also, Section 4E was added to the SANDAG bylaws, providing direction to the executive director on fulfilling responsibilities consistent with the requirements of the bylaws and the board policies and the employee handbook, recognizing those in order of precedence, as well as other administrative policies of SANDAG. In addition to the bylaws, there were revisions that were made to 2 different board policies. Section 3.1.15 of Board Policy 1, that is the allocation of responsibilities. This board policy focuses on the board's delegation of responsibility to its policy advisory committees that report up to it. And this section was amended to clarify the process for board leadership to take action on time-sensitive actions. This allowed that time-sensitive action to be taken with the written concurrence by the chair, with the written concurrence of the first and second vice chair, and only being able to exercise the authority of the executive committee with regard to items that are within the executive committee's authority. So for example, that can involve a budget amendment of up to $500,000. So long as there is initially a due diligence made to convene a meeting of the executive committee within the time that is needed. And only if that meeting of the executive committee cannot be duly convened is this authority of the executive committee conferred upon all of leadership. Board policy 17, this is delegation of authority from the board to the executive director. This was also amended at sections 5 and section 7 to clarify the executive director's responsibility for administering Sandag's personnel system and clarifying that that must be done consistent with what is in the employee handbook. I'll also note, not directly responsive to anything in the audit, but in this round of board policy updates, there were also extensive updates that were made to board policy 11. This is Sandag's travel procedures policy. And these updates were made based on collaboration between management and Mary Kay on suggested best practices. With that, I will turn things back to Melissa.
Great. So thank you, John, for that portion. And let me pick up here to sort of talk about the second group of actions that were completed. And these were the 6 actions in total. The slide notes the specific action numbers. And these were all related to the personnel elements that were contained in the FY22 program budget. So things regarding staffing, compensation, and benefits, and so forth. Management presented its draft budget to the board in March, and then the final budget was presented and approved by the board at their meeting on May 14th. So again, I think I noted earlier with respect to these 6 actions, it was management's intention to prepare and document information pertaining to the proposed personnel costs that were being recommended as part of the budget, and also to ensure that the information was fully and transparently communicated to the board as they considered those recommendations as part of the budget. Again, the staff report and the action plan document that were provided to you today as part of this agenda describe the work that was completed. And if I can just maybe highlight a few of those items for you. Again, one of our goals was to enhance our written and verbal communication to the board. Relative to prior years when budget documents had been presented, or at least personnel components of budget documents, we believe we provided a significantly greater level of information about staffing, compensation, and benefits for the board as part of their consideration. This was achieved both through written communication, again, in the staff reports that were prepared as part of the budget consideration and approval process. And also there were opportunities to make verbal presentations to the board, again, during the consideration of the draft budget and the final budget. In addition to our communication of the components in the budget, the efforts to provide or to prepare additional documentation regarding the preparation of our various estimates and analyses and other information that pertains to staffing, salaries, and benefits was addressed as one of the action items. Many of these components flow through into the chapter 11 of the budget document. And again, attachments that we've included here today, specifically 2 and 3, are examples of the work completed responsive to these actions. Another component of the work completed here was the development and implementation of a policy that describes the various activities and responsibilities for maintaining, seeking board approval, communicating, and record keeping for the classification salary range table, as well as the special compensation table. This policy is included as attachment 4 to your agenda package. I believe that starts on page 51 of the online document. I'd like to mention here that as part of preparing this policy, management consulted directly with CalPERS to ensure that the proposed processes for the board, the governing body, to approve the salary range and special compensation tables met all of the legal requirements. And this is reflected in the procedures within the policy document. And in a related action, one that we completed ahead of time, a new process was implemented whereby those employees, particularly senior management, who have responsibilities for preparing and presenting the salary range and special compensation tables, acknowledge their understanding of those responsibilities. And a copy of that acknowledgement process, including the signatures obtained earlier this year, is included as attachment 5. And then just to round out this group of activities related to policies and the budget, I mentioned a few minutes ago that staff consulted with CalPERS regarding the legal requirements for governing body approval of the salary range and special compensation tables. So CalPERS also advised us on the form, content, as well as preparation of the special compensation policy or table. In fact, they provided a review and feedback on an early draft of the document to help ensure that it was fully compliant with all of the requirements. That special compensation table was included as part of the final FY22 program budget and approved by the board on May 14th. And language describing adoption of the special compensation table was included in the budget resolution. Following the board's adoption of the policy, this document was posted to the career section of the SANDAG website. It's also being posted internally for employees to access, and hard copies are provided, are with our receptionist and readily available for review by members of the public. And this posting is part of the requirement, part of the legal requirements for the special compensation policy. So moving on to the market salary range study that was completed. This was one of the larger efforts undertaken in response to the audit from last year. Staff engaged our compensation consultant, CPS HR, to perform this project for us. CPS provided guidance for the design of the study, also the technical expertise regarding data gathering and interpretation, evaluation, and support for the recommendations that were ultimately made for the study. Regarding the design of the project, which followed industry best practices for these types of projects, CPS evaluated the salary ranges for 42 benchmark positions, including 6 executive level positions. And collectively, these 42 benchmarks represented about half of the employee group. Data was gathered from 15 public agencies that were considered comparable to SANDAG in terms of function, size, and complexity. And our consultants also gathered or considered information published by the Economic Research Institute, ERI, with that data representing a blend of pay rates reported both by public and private sector organizations across a variety of industries, in effect giving us reference points for in the project overall for both public and private sector data. So overall, the study found that the salary ranges for some of our positions were at market. In fact, a majority of them were at market, while others, for example, in our finance, communications, data and technology positions were low relative to market. We took those summary of those recommendations to the board as part of their consideration of the final FY22 program budget, and those recommendations were approved on May 14th. We've subsequently implemented those recommendations, the salary range table recommendations for employees. The recommendation to the board also included their consideration of an equity adjustment pool as part of the FY22 budget. This is equivalent to about 1% of the proposed salary and benefits budget. And the intent of that 1% pool is to support pay increases for employees whose current pay rate is considered low relative to the market and to the data that we found in the study. Due to some budget constraints, not all of the recommendations can be fully implemented in FY22, and we've noted those additional changes that will be proposed as management begins preparation of the FY23 budget in the upcoming months. And for your reference, the project report that CPS provided is included as attachment 6. So that's a recap of the work that the team here completed primarily between April and June. And before I wrap up, just wanted to also make note of several actions that are also underway and on track for completion by the committed due dates. 2 of these are actually due for completion by the end of this month. And so, Mary, you'll be getting information from us in the next few days. These pertain primarily to processes and practices for distribution of compensation adjustments to employees. Mary had consulted with management several months ago as we were designing and implementing and testing the new practices. And I know there's some testing that is happening. And based on those preliminary results, we intend to move ahead with adopting those practices, repeating them for a second time coming up. There also are some other items due for completion by the end of December. And as I mentioned, all of those are currently underway and on track for completion. This particular set of activities relates to many of our financial policies and procedures, a little bit related to comp program administration, payroll reconciliations, and so forth. So again, when that work is completed, you can expect to hear from Andre and his team with respect to their progress. Also wanted to mention that we are currently on the agenda for the Board of Directors meeting on October 8th. We, again, John, myself, and Mary are planning to provide a similar report to this report today to the Board of Directors at that time. And we do plan to come back to the Audit Committee at future meetings to provide a summary of the remaining items in the action plan, either before the end of the year and I assume in the early part of next year. So this concludes our portion of the presentation this afternoon. I believe Mary's going to take it from here, and then to let you know, the team and I are available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Melissa. Mary, as you get started, I'll just note that hopefully we'll be able to have some time left for questions at the end. I don't know how long your presentation part is going to be.
Yeah, it's going to be quick.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Because I issued a report, and it's there if you would like to read it. I don't think repeating everything Melissa said is necessary. There was a lot to look at. All the policy changes and everything. I did identify them in the report in detail and what the results were. But just to narrow everything down, I did vouch everything. I looked at the changes that were provided. They provided me all the evidence and documents that were needed to provide. I had no issues. I did make a couple of recommendations around the appearance of the budget and how it was provided to board members. And it was really only just trying to make it more simplified and easy, like a dashboard I suggested, where board members can actually drill down if they want to and actually see the positions instead of just a lot of numbers. If it more like a flow chart of positions and where those new positions are laying and what kind of positions they are, just something more user friendly. And I know that they're working on a new budget system. So, possibly all that will eventually be possible. I just think the easier when you're giving a board member, 700 pages of a budget, it's just much easier for them to have some type of a matrix or a flow chart that they can drill down to, that's not just so overwhelming, because there are so many numbers naturally in a budget that's existing. So that was my only recommendation. All of the 11 items were fine. That part of the plan has been cleared. There are 2 items that I'm looking at, and I'm looking at them together: fiscal year 21's compensation and how they distributed that, as well as 22 that they'll be distributing. And as Melissa shared with you, really we're going to take that sort of together, do some testing around it. I'm going to look at 21, give them my feedback so they can make sure in 22 they incorporate that feedback, and then I'll look at 22 after the fact. So that's why it's going to be delayed a bit. At this point, so far, I've looked at the compensation to see if it was consistent and fair and reasonable. And at this point, it has been. The calculations have been fairly distributed and appear very equal. The next step in that, and this is for fiscal year 21 because 22 hasn't been provided to me yet. I will look at the documentation around some of them that are a little higher, some that are a little lower, and I'll look to see how they justified that, right? So I'll look at the documentation to determine, did they sufficiently identify why someone didn't get as much as everyone else, or why someone got more than everyone else. But pretty consistent across the board at this point, and pretty fair from what I could see. The only thing I have, one caveat that I have to kind of state, is I did look at the CPS HR's consulting compensation that they performed. And it looks and appears to be reasonable. The methodology that was applied appears to be sufficient, but I do have to say I didn't audit it for reasonableness, if they used the right agencies, if they compared the right, I didn't audit it. And I do need to, and I don't think that was the intent, right? Is that they actually went out and did have CPS do a compensation comparison, and that was complete and it was done, and the methodology does seem very reasonable. So that part is what I can state on that. So other than that, we'll move forward. We'll finish up the fiscal year 21 and 22 adjustments to make sure that they're great, and this can be put behind us. But so far, so good.
Great, thanks. Does that wrap up your portion, Mary?
Yes, it does.
Perfect, thank you. With that, I'll see if we have any public member comments. Francesca, it looks like nobody has their hand up.
I don't see any hands, Chair.
Great. Anybody have board member comments or questions? Wow, very thorough. I see no board member comments or questions. Otherwise, so I think I'll poke in it with a, oops, Bob.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
Okay.
First of all, to Melissa, John, and Mary, thank you for this report. Very extensive, very clear. So I really appreciate that. Just have a couple of questions, and both you, Melissa, and Mary, you may have answered this along the way, and I just didn't pick up on it. So please forgive me if we're kind of repeating that. But there were, and I'm looking at attachment 1, just to let you know, which I think came from Melissa, if I'm not mistaken. Looking at kind of, mainly it's the status of various recommendations, not so much the date. But there were, well, I went back and I looked at April's report, and I noticed there were 3 recommendations where the status changed. When I'm not taking, it didn't go forward, wasn't completed, it kind of went backwards from complete / pending auditor review back to whatever that solid circle is, underway. And so I kind of want to just ask the question, why did that occur? And let me give you the ones that there are. The first one is under recommendation 5.4, where it's talking about update accounting procedures to ensure appropriate controls for payroll processing functions. Again, in April, that was marked as completed / auditor pending auditor review. The next one was 6.2, where the recommendation is strengthen procedures for awarding compensation adjustments, merit increases, bonus awards to employees. That's the other one that was kind of marked the same way in April, completed, pending auditor's review. And then the last one was under 8.1, develop processes to maintain systems and documents with accurate and consistent use of employees, job titles, and other relevant information. So it was just I think it's a very simple question. Just in my own mind, I can probably figure what had occurred, but I kind of wanted to throw it out just for transparency in the public. Can you guys know why it changed?
I can offer an explanation, and what happened, so the work didn't change and the status didn't change, but we found we needed to express the status in some different ways. So in April, I believe that the symbol that you were seeing, so it was the half filled in circle.
Yeah.
That in April referenced work that was underway. And when we prepared this version of the report at the end of June, we changed what that symbolized to mean that it was complete and it was pending review. Does that make sense? And
So
now the solid, the open circle with the more solid green outline is work that's underway.
Okay.
I'm
So
happy.
in April, that's how you posed it, was partially completed, I guess. That's what it
Correct.
said. Okay.
Correct. So essentially we added the category in this current status update of the report. We added the category of work being complete and pending Mary's review. We didn't have that in April. So it's a new classification of the work, if you will.
Okay. Is it consistent with the classifications that you present at the beginning of your report? Because the way that it's described, the way that I took it anyway, with kind of that half circle being filled in, was the recommendation was complete, but it was pending Mary's review. And so that's why I kind of brought the question. But I think what you're telling me is that that really wasn't the case in April.
Correct. In preparing the status report for the audit committee today, we had subsequently heard from Mary regarding all the items that had been reviewed and completed. So there are no more half circles in the report, in the version that you saw today.
Okay.
Does that make, yeah, because Mary had finished her review.
Okay. I think so. But again, I don't want to make, Chair, I don't want to make a big issue out of this, because you're still, as far as the due date is concerned, you're still within that period. It was just, normally you don't see something stepping backwards when it comes to status. And that's why I was asking. So
Understand.
I'm fine. Miss Mary, do you want to add any comments or anything?
Yeah, I was trying to follow what you were, now it took, because this isn't my document, so I was trying to follow what you were saying, and I do understand what you're saying, Bob. But yeah, and I also see what she's explaining is that initially it was complete / pending, and there are no more of that because I've done all my review. I'm up to date on all my reviews. So now they've added this underway as it's underway, but it's not yet complete, nor is it pending my review.
Okay. So you've kind of
I
reviewed it
understand.
and said, yeah, you guys are on the right track. And I understand what you're saying. And so, but it's not been completed. And I guess that's where I was kind of stumbling a little bit, as I understood that. And I don't know if that, Melissa, if you want to think about revising that particular phrase. And again, I don't know how anybody else had interpreted it, but I was interpreting it as, oh, recommendation's been complete, but Mary still needs to look at it and
Mhm.
approve it. I think what you guys are saying is that Mary's already looked at it. And if I can, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, Mary, but it's you approved it. So they're on the right track and they just need to fulfill the rest of the
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah, and I didn't necessarily approve it. I mean, in a lot of cases, we're working together. And so sometimes they'll provide me and ask questions and I'll say, yes, you're on the right track. This looks great, but I haven't yet reviewed it for officially reviewed it. So
Okay,
it's a back and forth that we're having. And I encourage that, right? It's working together as, this is what we're doing. Is this what you agree we should be doing? And what's your perspective? And they're getting that. And then they're going back and they're completing it and working on it. And then they come back and forth with me, but I hadn't yet, that's not my review. That's just my input.
Okay.
So to clarify further on that point then, Mary, so if we had an item that was complete under the latest symbology that we're using, that an item that's marked as complete pending OPA review, that then hypothetically could go back to the previous one as underway if you provided change information that needed to be incorporated, correct? If you effectively rejected it.
Yes, I would assume that would be the reasoning. If it's, again, their document, but yes, that would make sense that it would say underway. Yeah.
Okay, so it can actually go from complete pending review to underway. That isn't necessarily what happened here. This sounds like this was just more of a matter of changing and updating our symbology, but it could actually go back if you don't, and is that correct, Melissa? You would mark it as underway if you got feedback from Mary that required further changes?
Correct, yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. And again, Melissa and Mary, this is more from my understanding. And so I appreciate your explanations. And that's all I have, Chair.
Thanks, Bob. Stuart, I see you're up now.
Yeah, thanks. I was just gonna say, I think this is a very helpful discussion because this issue of the symbology is, as the chair refers to it, it will come up really with every instance of an action plan, right? So as a consumer, I would just say it's really helpful to just come up with something that makes clear the difference between when management thinks they've completed something and when the auditor agrees with management that in fact it's complete. So whatever everybody thinks works for them, again, as a consumer, it's really helpful just to make sure that there's clarity in that distinction. Thanks.
Yeah, and just to add to that, again, this isn't really my document, but I understand the logic behind it. And I think it makes sense the way they currently have it. If it's completed, it's done. I've looked at it, they've done it. Is that my understanding, Melissa? It's done. Complete and pending my review, in my opinion, means they've already had these back and forth discussions with me. They're done. They now have their final product. I just need to do my part. And then the underway to me would be, they're going back and forth with me and seeking my guidance, and they're still working on it as they're doing that. I may have provided input, I may have provided guidance, but they're still working on it. That to me would be the underway. And then, of course, not started as we're just not there. Is that correct, Melissa?
You got it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks. Was that all you had, Stuart? Okay, great. Yeah, just so you know, your hand's still up. So again, I also like to give my thanks to Melissa, Mary, and John for the presentation. Really nice. I do think, just for clarity perspective, just summarizing status of where we're at. So is from, and I'm not, maybe was in there, but just from the perspective of, it looks like from my interpretation is that one, everything's on track as far as where we were. We didn't have to shift. I know in previous quarters, they've shifted around due dates. We didn't have to shift any due dates for any of the actions this time. And then to your credit, Mary, nothing's waiting on you at this point, at least either. So at this point, everything's on track. The ones that are complete and verified have been verified and we're looking good. And Melissa, you're feeling good for the rest of the items too, right? For the rest of this year, or?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I don't think anything underway. Just out of curiosity on the, just for my own edification, because there's nothing to be done about it at this point. When we do the salary and comp study, since you spent a while on that, I assume that's just looking at comparable pay scales and not actual compensation. And the reason I asked that question is, having been in different areas in the private industry in the past, I do know that in the private industry, it's very, very common for almost everybody in a pay range to be at the bottom of that pay range, right? It's very uncommon to see people at the top of the pay range. So that's why I was kind of curious, but you're just looking at published or known pay ranges for other industries, not at actually what people are getting compensated at, correct?
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
We were sort of to that point deliberate about the choice of title for the project, a salary range study.
Right. Okay.
They're often called compensation studies, which I think tends to cause people to believe they're about actual pay. So we did try to use that.
And I do encourage us when we bring it to the board too, that we also maintain it clear. This is just pay ranges, because again, I do know, at least in the private industry, that people tend to be at the low end of those pay ranges.
Yeah, in the public industry, it's a blend, right?
Right,
Depending on when you started in that range, you could be at the top, the middle, or the end.
Right. Yeah.
And it also depends on the agency. So, there's a lot that goes into that. So, and definitely private, it's all public information, including the employee and what they're making right to the year.
You mean in public, not
in public. Yeah, but private, it's not for information. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then with respect to that, it sounds like, Melissa, I can't remember the other database that you said you used. So you said you surveyed something like 20 some public agencies, or was it? Anyway, 15 public agencies, and then you incorporate. Was the private information just through this extra other database that you used? That's where we got the mix of private industry information. Okay.
So it's the Economic Research Institute, which is
right, that one,
standard compilation for considering labor market data, and our compensation consultants were the ones who gathered the appropriate information from that.
And they didn't keep just the public agency information separate for the perspective of that analysis. It was just all put together.
My understanding is the data, the ERI data is a blend of public and private. So that can't be separated. So we had our public sector data and the ERI data.
Okay.
Which is a blend.
Yeah. Well, in the future, it might be interesting just to see the public sector data as well. But again, this is sort of water under the bridge because the board's taken action on it. But I think it would be interesting to see that too. Okay. I see no other board member hands up on the agenda. This says this is just an informational item. In my run of the show, it's asking for a motion. I don't think we can do that since it's just informational. Do we normally want a motion for this, Mary, to move this onto the board?
I don't think we've done that before.
Okay.
John, your opinion?
I agree with you, Mary.
Okay, thank you. That would make sense to me. So with that, we've already tackled item number 7. And that then brings us to the end of the regular meeting. Our next audit committee meeting is scheduled, as is on the screen, for Friday, October 22nd, 2021 at 12:31. And as per the executive director's comments at the beginning, I believe this one will still also remain virtual. So we will continue to do this one by Zoom. I hope everyone here has a great weekend, and it was good seeing you all after our 2-month break. And we will see you all next time.